Alright, so yet again, here with another video. Funny enough, it's actually 12:15 a.m. on the 14th, so I'll be uploading this tonight, or I guess early this morning. So, but meanwhile, obviously, I'll still make the Valentine's Day MAS video, so there's that. I still haven't gone to sleep, so obviously it'll be when I go to sleep, wake up, and is at the end of this day, rather than the very start, because, again, right, 12:16 a.m. That's still basically night, so it'll just be next night, right? Obviously same day, but again different time. But anyway, besides that, right, I actually somewhat teased this video in the previous video I made, right? And that previous video was the previous video I made on basically the session over like maturing kids content, right? Where I mentioned indie games, right? And that was something to where I wanted to talk about then, but I knew I would want to save it for a separate video. And I had also brought up MLB, funny enough, so I actually made a video on that. Still haven't finished up season 4 yet. Again, the problem may not even make an R1. Again, because I used to make that stuff, right, that content, and then again, I stopped at season 4. I just made the one video on the reveal because everyone keeps fucking talking about it. There's so much more I could talk about in that season with, Marinette telling Alia, right, Felix's episode, the whole, like, charm and then being able to break the charm thing, the entirety of the fucking, yet again, our time-traveling episode. I could talk about a lot of stuff, but I just want to talk about the reveal, because that's something where it's like, people are really acting as if, like, it made any sort of difference. Like, I can, like, again, I already Googled or looked up the reveal on YouTube, and that's what everything was showing. And again, right, so miraculously, but if you go to that playlist, I actually have the latest video. Prior to that, the latest video was, like, I think January 2020, and that was the themes and easiest way you could figure each other out. So that was, spring 2020, right before season 4 was out. And then now I've just got the new video on why the reveal doesn't matter. It's only 15 minutes compared to like the hour-long videos I made previously. But the 2-hour 50-minute video that I made, holy crap, I don't know how I did that. Because it started out normal. It started out 30 minutes, 18, 43, 7, and then a 3-parter. And then it gets into like 2 hours, 1 hour 17, 1 hour 22, 2 hour 50, 1 hour 44, right? But then again, right, I just made that video. Honestly, I don't even think I'm going to really make another video. Because obviously I'm going to watch... I watched a couple of them, right? But I still need to watch, like, Risk, which is the one where apparently we get in our Chat Noir, and then the finale. Or wait, no, that is part of the finale. There was one before that. I watched the new, I think I've watched, like, up to episode, like, hold on, let me look this up. Right, I know this is, completely not related to the video at hand, but, yeah, so I believe for that I actually have, I've watched up to Ephemeral, right? And again, because that's, what would you call it? Because that's the one where it's like, that was the episode 100. That was where we got the alternate fucking timeline. But yeah, so I still need to watch Kuroneko, Penalty, and then Risk. And then apparently, yeah, we got the last one. So I don't even know if this is the last season. I doubt it, but I guess it'll be interesting to kind of see what happens. But again, that's besides the point, right? So for this video, right, besides talking about indie games, right, not only do I want to talk about indie games, right, because indie games is obviously, part of it, right? Because obviously in the previous video, not the miraculous one, but the one before that, I talked strictly about FNAF and Pokemon, right? But I kind of wanted to expand that to talk about not only indie games. There was something else that I wanted to talk about. I don't exactly remember what it was, though. It was indie games, and then... It was indie games. That was the main thing. But there was something else that I just thought of that I could also tie up and then wrap into this video. So it was indie games. Oh yeah, indie games and analog horror, right? Those, because I've mentioned both of those recent videos, right? Again, and it was only in that previous video where I brought up indie games, but I had to force myself to not talk about, because I knew that that'd be a separate video. But again, that's going to be... Because, again, that video was specifically talking about, it was talking about, even though it was talking about kids' content, right, the examples I used were FNAF and Pokemon, right, both kids' series, right, despite what other people may think. And that's something to where I brought up indie games, but like that's something to where it's like I do think that indie games are mostly kids games, or at least like that's their main audience base, right? But again, it's not exactly the same because I was only using FNAF and Pokemon as like examples, right? I wouldn't use like indie games as a whole or Analog Core as a whole because that's again I want to make a separate video of those, but that's what I'll talk about now, right? And again, how rather than the obsession over maturing kids games, right? The obsession over um, again, indie games and analog horror, right, themselves, right? So I guess alternative, because they very much go hand in hand, right? And it's also like very much like they haven't always gone hand in hand. Hold on, let me just had to correct my back for a sec. Don't have good genes in my family, but again, right? That's besides the point. But I'd say indie games and analog horror almost goes hand in hand at this point, right? And again, I've talked about analog horror before, right? Specifically in my FNAF Plus video, saying that I don't think FNAF Plus is going to be able to escape the oversaturation of analog horror because it's very much rooted in analog horror, right? It's not like our fan games where it's not. Because even other ones that I guess supposedly amp the scary factor, right? So like, good example of that would be, which I even brought up in that video, Joy of Creation Reborn. In the recent video on the kids games, right? Again, I brought Final Nights, right? Those aren't rooted in analog horror, but they still amp the scare factor, right? Again, FNAF Plus, it amps scare factor, right? But it's also unfortunately rooted in analog horror. And again, I just don't think it's going to really be able to escape the oversaturation, which is something I mentioned before, but it's also something I want to bring up in this video, right? Because this video, again, I wanted to make, and I had the idea to make the video on indie games, but since analog horror is very much tied to that, at least nowadays, again, I figure I may as well make it on both. And again, this video being the top, this video will be, again, the obsession and not overration, that's not a fucking word. The obsession and then obsession over saturation of indie games and analog horror. I think I'll still use the term oversaturation. Or I don't want to use obsession because I used it in the previous video. I wouldn't say it's an obsession or it's an obsession. I guess I could, and then actually I could use the obsession. And then again, what I'll do is I'll simply change the previous video title. Like, let's go here, right? Again, I've got this video, right? Again, so I can actually just change the title, right? Rather than obsession, I can use like fixation. So again, right? The fixation. Because the fixation, again, that is an equivalent term, right? So I feel like that's actually pretty good. Like, that actually ends up working out. And then I can use obsession and then oversaturation of this video. Again, because both are O terms. So that's actually not too bad in terms of that. So, yeah, right? Again, I've got plenty of security breach videos, right? And again, so this one will still go under that topic because it's still related, right? Again, say I put the Why I Hate Art Gaming Commentary channels under there, and then again, also Silent and Vanessa Vane Deserve More. I put all those kind of videos in there, and also the Why I Hate FNAF Fandom, Why It's the Worst. So, again, I put all those videos in there, so again, I may as well put these in there. The fixation over maturing kids content, right? Like, again, I feel like fixation is a better term anyway, so again, right? And then this one I can use obsession and then oversaturation, right? So, or oversaturation and obsession. But again, that's the point, right? So obviously, the title of the video, obsession, oversaturation, over indie games and analog horror. So that's what I need to talk about in this part, right? Not waste fucking time. So when it comes to that, right, I already mentioned analog horror, right? Again, multiple times in previous videos. Didn't think I'd make a video on it, but again, I got the idea for indie games, so I may as well make it on both, right? Because the previous video was specifically talking about FNAF and then Pokemon as like examples for a different issue, again, regarding, like I said, that fixation over maturing the kids content, right? But this one's, again, going to be focused on these two specifically, right? Which, again, I'm not going to make the argument because I do believe that they are also inherently like kids-centric, right? Or they're targeted towards kids, like that's the primary audience. But that's I'm not necessarily going to make that step for this video. I'm just, again, going to keep it in and of itself. So again, just focusing on analog horror and indie games themselves, right? So obviously, analog horror, I brought that up already, mentioned in FNAF Plus, right? But it's all something where it's very obviously, there's been a lot of stuff being made on it as of recent, right? Specifically as of, I'd say, mid to late 2021. Like, you've seen a lot more analog horror, right? Obviously, originally, like, some of the first series that came out were Local 58 and then Gemini Home Entertainment. those were like, I'd say the first ones, or like some of the first, right? At least in a more contemporary sense, because it's always existed, right? But I'd say in terms of contemporary analog, right? Again, I'd say Local 58, Gemini Home Entertainment started. Then you started to get other stuff like, I feel like with the release of the Walton Files, that kind of kicked it off, right? Because that was like analog horror and almost like a game type form. That's something to where like that's like that. I feel like that's kind of what truly kicked it off, because that's when you started to get all of these other like series, spin-offs, right? You know, funny enough, it actually ended up reviving the Backrooms, but that's partially what contributes it. But that's like a specific thing, separate thing, right? But again, I do feel like the Walton Files, that kind of kick-started it, right? You know, that kind of revived it, resuscitated it. So I do feel like that directly contributed to that. And then you see like newer stuff like Mandela Catalog. Again, you have you have even actual games like Andy's Apple Farm. That's like the actual analog horror game, which is based off a parody of a actual game. Funny enough, but and then there's just again our new stuff, right? So and like the Backrooms, like I specifically mentioned. But again, it's something to where it's like. Yeah, it's something to where it's like clearly it's oversaturated, right? Again, I feel like literally you can look up on YouTube analog horror parody, right? Like again, analog horror, or you can type up analog horror. I'm not going to show it here, but I'll read off their. Okay, I misspelled analog. I'll read off the responses if you type it off. First one is analog horror. Second one is analog horror be like. So that's something to where it's very clearly that's a sign that obviously, you know, again, basically it's again there's more content than there is demand, at least as of this point, right? Initially it was the other way around, but very clearly it's not, right? So it's analog horror be like, analog horror Markiplier, analog horror reaction, analog horror explain, analog horror paraleave, FNAF meme music playlist, iceberg game, local 58 channel. So anyway, but the fact that the second one's analog horror be like, and if you type that in, you've got first video analog horror be like 1.2 million views. Second, every analog horror video 372K. Funny enough, third one, the creepiest analog horror video, and it's the whole FNAF like VHS tapes or whatnot. Which again, to be fair, I think what's it called? Granted, again, now there's like multiple VHS tape series. The only one that I remember were the Squimpus ones, because he stopped making them like about a year ago. So very much he made them before it kind of like blew up. Like I'd say like before like it became super contemporary, at least when he started, right? But now there's like others, and it's like now it's very much like, again, like it's very much like at this point like again, you can just scroll down, you'll see tons of like analog horror be like videos. So again, it's actually I can own FNAF VHS tapes. So I want to look at the Squimpus ones, because those were like, that was the first kind of, yeah, so all of his stuff was over a year ago. In fact, the very first one he made was 2 years ago. So he kind of made his stuff before, you know, it really blew up in terms of, like, you know, contemporary analog horror, right? But now you got other ones, and it's kind of like again, it's really overstated its welcome at this point, right? So very clearly, you know, there's an issue. And then funny enough, what's it called? Like, I actually, because I watched some of this stuff, right? The funniest one I saw was the Smile tapes, right? Like, if you look at it, it's actually kind of, oh shit, they actually released a new one, huh? But it's actually kind of hilarious, because in case you didn't know, Mandela Catalog used the Jerma face, right? But the Smile tapes, it's something to where it's like, they actually, like, it basically is the Jerma face. So it's actually kind of hilarious. Yeah, they actually fucking, so they actually made some, huh? That's kind of fun. That's kind of funny. Because I watched up till volume 2, but again, right? It's like besides the point. They also made new Backrooms videos, but again, right? Oh damn, Cad. Oh shit. Apparently Cad Bane dies already. I probably shouldn't have said that in this video. Sorry if you're a fucking fan. I'm just literally, I went back to the main page in the video of how Cad Bane fans reacted to his death. Because they brought him back. Apparently he's dead. I don't know. Fucking, I don't watch the show, but it's like, anyway. That's besides the point, right? But very clearly, I think we can all like it's something to where it's like you can just get the sense, right? Because I don't think Local 58 apparently revived itself as an ARG. Is Gemini Home Entertainment still around? Another one that's still going is Monument Mythos, but let me see. So Gemini Home Entertainment, is it still going? I mean, the last one was 7 months ago. So, and this one obviously it started 2 years ago. What about Monument Mythos? Because that one I believe is still going. Okay, we got it's just a fucking Wendigo video. Okay, never mind. The actually okay, yeah, we got a couple new ones. Air Force One Angel, Liberty Lurkers. So again, that's and then you got some meme videos. So I guess it's something to where it's like I don't know, but so very clearly, right? The issue being, there are some series who have started and ended. Again, you know, the original FNAF VHS tapes made by Squimpus, not any of like the parodies or knockoffs, right? You had Local 58, but now it just revived itself as an ARG. Gemini Home Entertainment may be over. The last one was like 7 months ago. Monument Mythos is still going. You know, Mandela Catalog's still going. Volume 2 wasn't even that good, but I assume they'll still be going, right? Because there's been like games and spin-offs made of it. Fucking Smile tapes. But that was just fine, because that I believe was like a perfect example, because it was like, it just reminded me of the whole Jeremy face in the Mandela Catalog. But again, besides the point, right? The kind of, because I want to wrap this up so I can move on to indie games and talk more about them. But kind of wrapping this up, right? The main point being that, again, analog horror, like, kind of, like, very oversaturated at this point. You know, I mentioned this in the Plus video, but specifically, when it comes to that oversaturation, right? Like, I'll talk more about it. Like, this is the oversaturation portion. The indie game portion would be the obsession portion, right? Which is why I'm moving on. But I think it's just very clear that, you know, again, there's just blatant oversaturation of analog horror. More supply than demand, right? And then that's something to where that in and of itself doesn't create issues. But again, when it comes to stuff like topics I mentioned previously, when it comes to this weird fixation over maturing kids games, right? Which, you know, funny enough, stems more from indie games. But obviously, because analog horror and indie games are so tied together, you know, one's going to affect the other. So I feel like now would be a good time to move on to indie games, because that's where more of the issues come from. But I feel like it's only exacerbated by analog horror. I should have started off with indie games and then moved on to analog horror. But it is something to where I brought up analog horror more in my videos, so it kind of made sense. But anyway, moving on. So, to indie games, right? What I wanted to talk about, again, this would be the obsession portion. Analog horror, oversaturation, indie games, obsession, right? This coming from a guy who plays, you know, obviously I watch analog horror, I brought the series, and I play indie games, you know, FNAF, the big one, right? But other games too, so it's like, again, you know, it's something to where it's like very much I'm involved, but I recognize a limit, right, that a lot of people don't seem to, right? And again, it comes with this obsession with indie games, right? So, and again, this obsession, right? So, bottom line up front, right? Like this obsession over indie games, like for whatever reason, people just think that like indie games are the only games, right? And this is especially when it comes to indie horror. Like, it's weird that many people who play indie horror games think that they're the only type of horror games. It's just like odd. Like, I don't know how else to phrase it or put it, because that's just what it is. Like FNAF's a good example, you know. Like, people talking about, like, and it goes to the whole, you know, FNAF is a kid's series type thing, right? A lot of people say, like, again and again, how people are using the argument, like, oh, the older games were better. Oh, it wasn't always a kid's series. How it's coming from a place of delusion and a place of, like, in basically a place of misguidedness, right? It's something to where it's like, you know, I have to question whether these people have actually played a horror game outside of indie horror. Because if they would have played it, right, like, what's the most recent one that's launched, right? Well, I guess Sifu doesn't count. I guess Dying Light 2. Like, for example, Dying Light 2, right? That would be a good example of a non-kids horror game, right? You know, the one I was thinking of that released the sooner before then was Resident Evil 8, right? So Resident Evil 8, good example of a non-indie, non-kids horror game, right? You know, I feel like there's very clearly a line between Resident Evil 8, you know, Dying Light 2. That's just the most recent one, because it was literally just released. I haven't played the original, but I've seen gameplay of the second one. It looks pretty good. But, like, there's very clearly, right, there's a difference between, Resident Evil 8, because that was just the one before then I was thinking of, or at least the one that blew up. There's lots of more obscure games out there that I could bring up that no one would know, but I just feel like those are kind of like the biggest examples. So again, you've got Resident Evil 8, right? That was the more Resident Evil 8, right? That was the last one, and then Dying Light 2 is the most recent one. Those two very good examples of non-indie, non-kids horror games, but for whatever reason, and it seems like people who, and it seems to be part of the obsession with indie games, and specifically indie horror games, that like, again, and specifically people saying like, oh, specifically FNAF, people saying, oh, this used to be scarier, right? It used to not be a kids game. But it's like, have these people played a non-indie horror game? Non-indie game in general? Like, you've got the two games I mentioned earlier, like very clear stark contrast distinction between indie horror, which again, I will make the argument that indie horror is basically kids. Like, again, it's geared towards kids, right? Very clearly. I won't say indie games in general because I brought that up earlier, but indie horror very much clearly is. But it always seems to be people who only play indie horror who seem to be hellbent. And again, this is part of the obsession. And this is partially ties to my previous video with the fixation on maturing kids content. Like, it seems to be this obsession over, like, trying to justify them playing. It's like, no, this isn't a kids game. It only now became a kids game, right? It wasn't always a kids series, despite the fact that it was. What else? Despite the fact there was always a kids series, right? They'll say, oh, it's only now becoming a kids game, right? Now becoming child friendly, right? And it's like they bring up alternative fan content, which I also brought up in the previous video on the fixation over maturing kids games, to where it's like they bring up fan content, and it's hilarious because I can look up these videos. So like you can look up why FNAF is not for kids, right? You see lots of these videos, right? FNAF is not for kids. And it's all VHS tapes. Literally, it's all VHS tape content. Okay, one of them's an SFM. Okay, never mind. Look, you can literally type verbatim why FNAF is not for kids. And it's all alternative fan content. It's actually, honest to God, hilarious. How these people really are just, delusional. I don't know what else to say. I really do think it's coming from a place of misguidedness, right? I do think they're very passionate, right? I don't want to say the term delusional because that's, pretty, that's pretty demeaning. But I do think it's coming from a place of misguidedness and passion, but something that plays into the obsession, right? They bring up fan content, alternative content. It's like, okay, what about the actual content? There's a reason why the fan and alternative content is different. Because, again, if you want to make mature fan content, go ahead. But when you try to say, oh, this is what the mainline game should be like, it's like, come on. And this ties into that obsession. It's like there are non-kids, non-horror games outside of, the indie games, right? Indie horror games, the indie genre. I'm willing to bet many of these people just don't play non-indie games. And that's kind of the issue. That plays in this obsession because I feel like more often than not, you see people who only play indie games as opposed to, let's say, only play regular games or even play both, right? You hate to see it, right? But again, it's something to where it's like you really do see that. It's like, it kind of just blows my mind to where it's like you really do see people hellbent on, oh, it's only now being this way. It should go back to the way it was. Or, oh, indie horror games aren't for kids, right? They're not directed towards kids, targeted towards a younger audience. They're for older gentlemen like myself, right? And it's like, you do realize there are none, and they say oh, these aren't kids games. Look at all this fan content, this alternative content. And it's like, you do know there's non-indie horror games, right? And they're not for kids, like Dying Light 2, Resident Evil 8. Those are just the more popular ones, right? There's obviously others I can just go through list series, right? Well, I guess that's a bad example. Cyberpunk, that's more like action adventure, right? But again, right? Zombie games would be a good example, right? You see lots of zombie games out there. Well, I guess shit, that is the Resident Evil series. You kind of forget, because the newer games are so much different. But hey, that's what the exact same argument that these people are using, right? But again, it's like obviously because Resident Evil is non-indie, you don't have the same breed of fans who are just hell bent on, and obsessing over indie horror that you do when it comes to like Resident Evil or like Dying Light. I feel like Outlast. Let me start listing out. So like Outlast, BioShock. Fallout, like I can bring up all these kinds of games, right? Like survival horror, right, is very big and non-indie, like outside of indie games, right? And I hate to say like outside as if indie games are more popular. There are more indie games, but it is something to where like it just seems like kind of wrapping this up because I'm taking long enough. There is just like this odd and weird obsession, like, because again, I talked about how the oversaturation of analog horror, and I do think that ties into this because again, they very much go hand in hand, and it very much seems like people are drifting between the two and coming over from there, right? And again, it only leads to probably because there is an oversaturation, they're realizing like, oh shit, I need to bail, right? Let's go to indie horror. Or like maybe the inverse where people are going from indie horror there, and then again, they're like, it's kind of feeding their, I guess, like sort of expectations for indie games, indie horror, indie games in general, right? Again, it is just something to where I kind of wrap it up again. They're just, at the end of the day, there just seems to be like this weird obsession with indie games and indie horror, and specifically how they're not kids games, it's only the new, and that's just FNAF as an example, like, oh, it's only the new games that are kid friendly, right? It wasn't always that way, despite the fact that it was always a kid series, and then indie games themselves aren't kids games, right? Indie horror isn't directed towards kids and a kid audience, right? But then it's like these people do realize that there are non-indie horror games, right? I listed again, Dying Light 2, Resident Evil. Those are the more popular ones, like Resident Evil 8, last one, Dying Light, this one. But there's also like Outlast, BioShock, Fallout. Those are very like horror survival type games, right? Like it's a very popular genre, like in terms of just horror, right? Like a spin take on horror, right? Horror survival. So, and then you have again, fucking obviously, and I hate to say it, outside of indie games, as if indie games themselves are more popular, but it is at the end of the day, right? You see more people who only play indie games than you do non-indie games versus both, right? It's something to where at the end of the day, there is just, and it's partially why I hate like FNAF, like the fandom, the fan base, these indie horror, like that kind of stuff so much. Like it really is hard to try and disassociate like the game from the, like again, fandom fan base itself, because they really it really is at the end of the day just this like odd obsession, right? Kind of like that odd fixation over maturing kids games. There's this weird odd obsession over indie games, and as if indie games are the only types of video games. But again, I'm gonna end it here. I feel like I talked enough. Again, like I said, I'll be doing the fucking Valentine's Day MAS thing, so that'll be tonight, right? But this, again, I didn't anticipate making this initially, but I brought up indie horror, right? Or indie games themselves in the previous video, right? The obsession over maturing kids games. And I also brought Miraculous Ladybug, which is why fucking, what would you call it? Which is why I watched it, right? But it's also something to where it's like, in terms of what would you call it? I brought up indie horror, but then thought of analog horror in terms of, I've already talked about multiple times before, so I felt like it was only appropriate that I make a video on those two together. But yeah, that's enough for this one, right? I'm going to end it. That's the end of this video. Again, I'm still with, obviously, whenever the patch comes out, it could be February, April, or March, April, right? Yeah, whatever. When it comes out, I'll play it, probably make a quick little video on it, talking about, oh, it's nice we have the save. I was just using the save bug anyway, so it doesn't matter, but I don't know, who knows. Maybe I'll try to get the Firescape ending. I can talk more. I'm honestly probably not going to make a video on that. I already did. Kind of branching now on these, like, talk type videos, right? Again, making this one now being on indie games, analog horror, right? And then other ones, like, I made one more Miraculously one. But I also talked about, again, kids content. I talked about art, gaming commentary channels, so. But again, that's all I need to talk about for this one. So I'm going to end it here, Don't want to drag it on longer than it is. But yeah, so don't know when I'll make the next one. Maybe it'll be on probably will be on Security Breach again, but who knows, right? Who knows? I just want to make this video on indie and then analog horror, just because it does kind of grind my gears, right? I'm surprised I'm only, because this wasn't something that I really saw until recent. I did see, what's it called? Again, I do like to think I was kind of ahead of the curve when it came to going into Security Breach with realistic expectations, but I guess I wasn't ahead of the curve on like the oversaturation of analog horror, because it's only now that again I'm making a video on it as per usual. Like I don't know, it's just probably because I was so focused on the art type of content that I would make in terms of gaming, not necessarily commentary, but or pure commentary to say. But again, I'm gonna end it here, so who knows what my next video will be. I don't know, you don't know, who knows, right? But again, you end it here, so yep, that's it for this one. See you in the next one.